Razor City. Copyright Richard Hendry, 2016. Claude. Book 1. Origins. A foul wind was blowing that day down the filth, maggot-ridden, sewage-filled side streets of Razor City. A deep gray sky hung above, its clouds bulging with acid rain and bolts of blinding lightning, bearing down on those unlucky enough to be spawned from this city's infected womb and coughed out onto its hopeless byways. Along the south side of the city, near the river the Indians called Ichiwata, which means the shallow death, a thin, frail man dressed in rags hustles down the Cannery Row streets and past the burned-out buildings of the once great tuna capital of the southwest eastern shore. The man is carrying something slung over his shoulder. His feet stumble and shuffle as he hurries into a doorway for cover from the storm. He pushes his body against the wall of the doorway and holds his breath, straining to listen for the sounds of someone following him. Over the wind, rain, and loud thunderclaps, he hears the sound of feet. He tightens his grip on the bundle he is holding. He closes his eyes and asks an unseen goddess for nothing more than a chance. Just one small chance, and not for himself. Torrents of water sweep past the doorway like rapids flowing towards the shallow death. Next to the doorway, a plastic trash can lay on its side. A combination of foul smells and insects rumble inside it as the rapid of water splashes the can. In the distance, the man can see his fate. 3 of them, filled with hate. They are the harbingers of death, and they are getting closer to him. Their hulking frames and black, soulless eyes move fast over uneven ground, closing on him. They are known to the people of the streets as the Triad, 3 forms that are neither man nor machine, but an unholy mixture of the worst of both. They travel as one, and they are in the employ of the Emperor of Razor City. The Triad sweep the streets of this city, doing the bidding for the powerful forces that rule over Razor City with an iron fist. They do not sleep, they feel no remorse, and they feed on which they kill. On this day, the Triad is coming for this man and what he carries, and nothing will stop them. The man pushes hard against the door, but it will not budge. He is trapped, and he knows it. He clutches his bundle even tighter. Inside the mess of towels and frayed blankets lay something that, in his last moments, is more valuable to him than air, more valuable than his own life. It moves slightly in its wrapper. He moves the blankets back to give it some air. Its strange little face and sharp teeth twist into what could pass for a smile. The man slides down the wall, sitting in the raging rainwater, waiting for his death. The dark figures now looming over him as he makes this last choice that he can. He holds the bundle close. He holds his breath for a second. A large hand like a mace at the end of a huge arm swings high above, readying to bring sweet silence to his tortured existence. As the hand comes down towards the man, he throws the bundle into the trash can. The force of the bundle landing inside the can pushes it into the now river of rainwater racing by, carrying the trash can and its strange cargo across the pavement and dumping it into the river of the shallow death. One of the Triad break off and chase the can to the river, then follow it from the shore. As the trash can floats down the river towards the Destiny Bridge, the man feels the sledgehammer fist of the Triad crash through his skull, followed by the stillness of the undiscovered country. The trash can spins in the currents of the river and starts to take on water as it passes under the bridge and sinks into a vortex in the water. The Triad leave, believing that the creature has drowned. Yet, as if pulled by some unseen force, the creature is alive, dropping down below the city foundation, still further down below another city, lost in the countless void of the past, a city that Razor City is built on, a city that in its day was a shining example of a great society. The trash can is pulled through an old aqueduct and forced through an old grate into a great hall filled with both life-giving air and knowledge from that forgotten past. Sensing something, a pack of river wolves make their way through the great library to the trash can, pulling at the blankets, pulling it out of the trash can, and starting to rip at its contents. The female of the pack suddenly attacks the young males with the blanket, forcing them to drop it. A small, pale, deformed infant unfolds out of the blankets onto the cold marble floor. The female moves close to see its horrible fanged face, and then turns it over with her nose, picking it up by its neck and walking away with it, as if guided by some unseen hand, to care for this abomination, and against all odds to nourish its freakish little soul in this darkest of places. Perhaps just pure luck, or perhaps a small chance granted by an unseen goddess. Claude, Book 2, The Emperor. High in the triple towers overlooking all of the rot that is Razor City, the Emperor paces back and forth, uncomfortable in his skin. Tall and thin with dark eyes and an even darker soul, the Emperor of Razor City is in a rage. He pounds his fist on the concrete desk and spews vulgarity at his minions. "Fools! Fucking fools!" he screams at the top of his hideous lungs. His black tongue dances inside his razor-toothed mouth. With each exhale, a foul stench blows into the room, causing the fools to wince and breathe through their mouths. The Emperor of Razor City has lost something tonight, something he values more than anyone can know, and he can feel it. Not like the feeling that comes from a sense of loss, but a real feeling, a connection. He can feel this thing. He can sense its distance, but he cannot pinpoint where it is, and this has put him in a rage. His triad has returned with empty hands and excuses, which for them would seemingly be impossible. "Get the fuck out, all of you," he growls at the minions as they make haste. He moves quickly to the window and pulls it open. He's desperate to free himself from these feelings of the weak. He leans out the window and fills his nostrils with the sickness and despair that wafts up from the city. It feeds him like a drug. It races through his body, coursing and pulsating until he is swimming in a sea of ecstasy from it. His skull bones twist under his skin, his jaw lunges forward, and then recedes as his true frame struggles to be contained within this facade. His mind's eye fills with the images of horror and mayhem, sad, mangled faces of the hopeless, and for a time his rage is quelled. He rests his hands on the window ledge and then leans out until his body flips out. Holding his body with one hand still on the ledge, the Emperor's body hangs off the side of the building, swinging in the hard winds that race up the side of the 200-story building. He twists around and grabs the ledge with his other hand, and then, as the second stage of euphoria comes pounding through his body, he starts to climb the side of the building, ape or tiger-like in his movements, racing up the side to the top spire over 300 stories tall. He howls into the night as thunder crashes around him. He looks out over the city that is his domain. His world is bleeding dry, and it fills his heart with sweet, delicate flavor of the suffering. He is power. He is the god of fear. He swings around the spiral, riding the electric waves of pleasure that come from all the blissful agony below. This was not always so. He recalls a time long before that the city was a shining light, a beacon for all of humanity. Razor City, once another city, a city called Sokar, which meant peace in the ancient tongue of the Sokarians. These people had believed in the values of love and the goodness in all men. They were driven by a belief in a creator and a savior that had guided them to build this place of peace. Peace, a word that his people had no use for. Peace brought no fulfillment to them, no nourishment. They lived on fear and suffering. He knew nothing in countless worlds that had been able to save anyone. The idea of a force of good was the babbling of children, the idle-minded ravings of those who sought to hide from their true nature and the true state of things, which were simple. There were those who knew fear and those who fed upon it. The people of Sokar thought themselves wise and had created a world without fear. They had lived so long without it that when they were faced with it, their misery was so intense he had never tasted anything like it. In all the worlds that his people had conquered, Sokar was the most ripe, the most vivid and exquisite pain. That had made Sokar the jewel of their empire, and he had become the emperor of that jewel. They had thought, at most before that fell, that their wisdom and knowledge would save them. They had not counted on the power of hate and fear, the primal forces of despair and pain, forces they had long left behind. These forces were overpowering, and they were ill-equipped to control such ancient feelings, and were easily conquered. Now all that remained of the city was buried beneath the obscenity that is Razor City. Even with his sharp eye, he could not find a spark from that old world. He had paved over that beauty and covered it in a thick coat of dismay and the blood of lost hope. The emperor laughed and screamed into the night. "Where is your wisdom now?" he shrilled, shaking the spire in the thin air. It arched wildly back and forth as if it might throw him off. "What is left of you is mine to devour. For whom among you shall stop me?" He spins round and round on the spire of the building and laughs. He knows no loss or fear. He cannot feel that which has been taken and drowned in the Black River. It is only a distant memory now. He is in the state of pure bliss. Inside the building, his minions shudder in fear and huddle together in the hopes that the emperor will be merciful in the light of their failure. A hope in vain, for the thing that feeds on fear can never understand mercy. Far below the howls of this creature's unspeakable evil and his misguided followers, far below the streets that run with pain, a small body is nourished, and it is growing strong. It is protected by wolves and encased in strong walls of the past, fortified on lost knowledge, and shaped by a guiding force stronger than fear. Claude, Book 3, The Fable of Sokar. In the dark of night, in small huddles, the old women of Sokar are sometimes given to tell stories that are in the forbidden tongue. They use the ancient words long since removed from all teachings. They tell these tales to scare the young ones. They tell these tales to feel things they should not feel, but mostly they tell these tales to remember and as a warning. This is such a tale. Caleb was lying on the warm grass in the field behind his house. Beside him, his plowshare lay unused. The sun, the giver of life and light, gently warmed his skin. His mother, Kara, worked close by, cutting leafy greens for their meal. She would glance over from time to make sure that Caleb had not wandered off. It was not that he was bad, but Caleb was different than the other children. He did not seem to be as content. He was always questioning the world around him. He always wanted more than they had. For a boy, Caleb seemed much more than boylike. Kara was concerned that Caleb would be one of the very few in her world that they called restless. It was a small amount of them, to be sure, but they were still there. Kara had never been restless, nor Caleb's father. It worried Kara and displaced her calm. She did not want him to be one that was set apart from the rest. She peeked at Caleb. He did seem content today, just laying there in the grass. The sight of that put her at ease, and she returned to her work. Caleb smiled as he laid there, his face smooth and a soft picture of a young man at peace. Although the smile may have been mistaken for calm by his mother, Caleb knew that the smile was from something else, something special, something that only Caleb knew. In his mind, Caleb was doing something strange. And when he was done, he felt the heat of the second star on his face. It had moved into a place in the sky as it always did, but this time, Caleb had known it was coming. He had used this special thing just before the second star rose, and just like that, it was there. "Mother," Caleb called out. "Yes, dear." "It worked." "What worked, Caleb?" his mother asked. "My thing. It worked. I did it, and then the second star rose." "What thing?" she asked, stopping what she was doing and moving closer to where he lay. "The special thing. I think it's called counting," he said without opening his eyes. "What is that? Counting? I do not think I've ever heard that word before." Kara was very worried. This was something very odd her son was doing. Caleb smiled and tried not to laugh. It was just as he was told it would be in the song the stone sang. His mother would not know what it was. He was the only one that knew. It was special. It was just for him. He could feel his whole body tingling. In his right hand, the round silver stone he had found earlier that day in a hole by the edge of the house was warm, and it moved, vibrating in his fist. "Caleb," his mother was yelling now, "why won't you answer me? What is that word? What does it mean?" But Caleb was lost now. In his mind, he was high above the house, soaring like a hawk. He could see everything, his city, his world. They all looked so small, so helpless. Helpless, he thought. Another word he had just made up. Helpless. That made him smile. In his mind's eye, he could see now, see the end of all of this. He could see he was special, and that he was better. Inside him something was happening. As his mother got more and more upset, he could feel it grow. It made him feel strong and powerful. She was screaming for him now to talk. That only made him feel more alive. He wanted to feel that way forever. The stone was on fire in his hand, and that was when he heard the song again. It told him that he could feel like that forever, and then it showed him how. In Caleb's mind, he saw such things, such strange and amazing things. All the colors, all the colors, but most of all was the red. So much red pouring out of his mother, and then out of the world. Kara's body shook as she stood over Caleb, screaming at him. She did not know what to do. He was somewhere else. He could not hear her. She was frantic. From inside Caleb's hand, she saw the glowing light. She stumbled back from the boy. A feeling she had never known before shot through her, making her sick. She spit all of her first meal out onto the ground and the bottom of her yellow bright dress. Such visions were racing through her head, such things she had only heard of in tales the old women told late at night about the ages long before. She tried to make sense of the visions. Kara felt as if the world was spinning so fast she might fall off. She held on to what little sanity she could as these things of horror flashed in her eyes. Below her, Caleb just smiled, but Kara knew he was seeing these things too. She closed her eyes tight and began to beg for mercy, for it to stop. Kara suddenly knew what she had to do, and a moment later there was peace for both of them. Others in the field that day had heard Kara's screams and were making their way to the sounds. They did not rush, for they could not have even began to understand what Kara and her son were seeing. Such things were so alien to them that a cry of fear was not even understood on the most basic, primal level. As they grew closer to Kara and the boy, the sounds had stopped. When they had found them, they stood motionless, not knowing what to do. The oldest woman in the field that day arrived later to find them all just standing there, staring at Kara and her son. their lifeless bodies, leaking red onto the deep green grass. Caleb's plowshare inside his mother's body, Kara's cutting blade thrust into her son's neck. The old woman knew what to do. They moved the bodies into the barn. She told the people to look around for a smooth, bright stone, and if they found it, not to touch it. After, the old woman went to town to tell the elders that the merchants of sorrow had returned, and death had found them again. She used the ancient words of the time and the years and of the former knowledge that was made obsolete by the peace and order of their world. She spoke in low tones of the forgotten concept of numbers and perception of time and of taking lives. The elders huddled together and read from the ancient text, trying to grasp what they should do next. In the field, the others were still looking for the stone, but it was too late. A small boy named Jacob had found it. It had called to him, and its song was sweet. He had found it and hid it under his bed. It was speaking all the ancient words to him, moving faster than with Caleb, filling his head with that which the elders had hoped they would never have to deal with again: hate, violence, lust for power, and above all, fear. Little did they know how soon things would return, for as the family slept in their warm beds, little Jacob was standing by the fire, staring at the axe, with the songs of the merchants of sorrow ringing in his head. Such are the tales of old women. Claude, Book 4, The Yearling. The massive stone walls arched into a cathedral overhead that gave off a dim luminescence to the great hall below, a light from a long-forgotten technology. Trash and broken bricks lay in a small pile on the solid granite floor. A thick layer of dust covered the walls and shelves that circled this huge place. The pack had just returned from a fresh kill, and as with every kill, it was offered to the boy first. The others in the pack would not wait long, but for the moment, Pale, the female pack leader, could keep them at bay. She called to the boy, and he moved quickly to the meat. He was only a year old, but he was well over 6 feet tall. He had developed at a rate that could not be human. He had come to that understanding from the teachings of the walls. The wolves did not understand this, but he did, and each day he had grown bigger and more powerful. It had only been 2 months before he could completely understand what Pale was thinking. She did not understand him yet, but he could hear her every thought. He knew what the pack called her. She was called Pale because she was white in color. He knew that they called him Claude because of his hands. He also knew that Pale did not know why she was helping him. She only knew that she had to do it. The wolves were simple to understand for Claude. However, why he was so different from them and others he had seen in the caves was not apparent to him yet. That was, until the day he almost fell. Claude spent his days wandering the hall. From time to time, he would climb the shelves to the top of the walls. He would have to stop as the walls curved towards the center. On one day, he dared to go just one more shelf, his claws digging into the shelf's solid rock. He tried to pull himself up, and that was when he lost grip. His legs came off the shelf below, and he was swinging by one hand from the highest point he had ever been to. Far below, Pale could see that he was in trouble and started to howl in fear. Claude instantly felt a surge of power. He pulled his whole body up onto the next shelf with ease and sat there, his breathing fast, his head spinning, and a feeling of joy raced through him unlike any he had known before. And that was when he had found that the shelves were filled with what he called beams of knowledge. As he sat there, he placed his hand on the shelf, and the tip of his claw slipped into an activation point in front of a chapter. The light came out of the back of the shelf and filled the area. As the light covered his body, visions and words danced before him. At first he did not understand what they meant, but after watching a few more, he soon understood that there was an order to them, And that was when everything changed for him. Over the next months, Claude spent all of his time going through the texts from the lost world. The wisdom and the fall of this great world known as Sokar was all here for him to experience. At night, he had started to go with the pack through the tunnels and even up to the surface. The surface intrigued Claude most of all. It had a scent to it that made him long for his next trip above. He knew that he should not stay up there too long, and Pale was so very worried each time he joined them. But to Claude, it was intoxicating and frightening all at the same time. Night after night, as the pack would hunt for food, Claude would watch the city. He could feel its pain. He saw it in the faces of the people that huddled into small groups by fires in the buildings surrounding the river. He could feel their fear. He watched as gangs beat the helpless and the dark figures danced, and even darker forces bathed in the gore and humiliation of those that fed on these streets. And while the pack hunted and ripped flesh, they did so to survive. These others in this dark city, they did these things for pleasure. He did not understand that, or the other feelings. A feeling of something so out of place in the city that he could not believe it was true. He felt light, a light that was glowing slowly. He wondered how anything pure could exist here. He wondered what his role was in all of this, why he did not feel the fear that they felt, or the horror. He had read that humans grieved for each other, yet he felt none of that. All he could feel was rage. He wanted this to stop. He wanted to see the city of Sokar here as it was in the teachings from the Great Hall. In the fullness of time, Claude would finish reading all of the teachings and truly understand the fall of Sokar. Claude then understood why he could smell that fear, and then at last he understood why he was different. Claude, Book 5, The Factory of Sorrow. Thal was to be king, born from the blood of an unholy union of Terran and Kalu. This youngling was to rule on high, over all things, keeper of the sorrow of all worlds. The Emperor had been manipulating human genes for 300 years to be able to mate and produce a creature that embodied all of the Kalu's strength and all of the humans' capacity for adaptation. It was the only thing about humans that he admired, their ability to adapt to any condition and to survive any torment. It was a question of will alone, a will that he knew would be the key to his people's ultimate domination of all things. Now, as his spawn grew inside the woman, he was pleased. He was sure that Thal would be everything that he had hoped. Thal would be a powerful force that could return to his home world and rule the Kalu universe. The woman, a child really, of only 16, was kept on the highest floor of the Triple Tower. Her given name was Ren, but the Emperor called her the Kalu word, Mur, which meant mother of the world. She had been the success from a long line of failures. Not only had she been the one to take his seed, but she had been one of 3 sisters. The other 2 died at birth. The significance of the number 3 had made him happy, and that she was the strongest of the 3 made him sure that this was the end of their long search. Deep in the bowels of the tower, the farm had been breeding the frail, as he called them, for hundreds of years. At the start, they harvested cells from humans. Then, when nothing was revealed, they harvested babies, and again, no results. Still, they went back a step to conception, believing that the DNA needed was only active in the formation of a fetus. Huge rooms filled with biological replication devices producing thousands of human embryos an hour. Then the humans would be dissected, and the stem cells would be isolated and brought each to the millions of possible expressions. Painstaking work that had gone on 24 hours a day for 200 years without any real understanding from where the human spirit springs. The mapping of the DNA code of the humans had been simple for the Kalu. However, understanding where the traits that would allow them to combine with the Kalu had proven to be quite the task. Impatient as the Emperor was, many of the technicians had been ripped to shreds in the light of each failure. In the beginning, he had not wanted to mate with them at all, only to locate the source of that strength that allowed them to endure. He was sure that if he found it, it could be implanted into the code of the spawn of the great Kalu line, such as his own, and thus completing the perfect being. The work had produced little answers. Only a byproduct of the testing was found to be useful. The suffering that came from the dissection was welcome, and even though they had stopped trying to extract the genes from the human code years ago, the Emperor allowed them to continue to dissect for the magnitude of sorrow it produced. Since then, the work had been different. Manipulating the genome to allow interbreeding had become the priority. Years later, the triplets had been born, and Ren, the one that his seed did not reject, had survived. And now, with her cries of pain, he was sure that his spawn was coming, and his legacy of sorrow would be complete. In a clean room on the 304th floor of the Triple Tower, Ren was screaming in pain. Deep inside her, something horrible was twisting, turning, and clawing to be free. The woman was cared for by human healers, human traders. These humans understood what they were doing and who the Kalu were. They traded the world for their own comfort. They helped the Kalu in exchange for a better life. These traders were known as apostates, a group of humans that at the end of Sokar defected and even helped the Kalu end their world. They aided the Kalu in many ways. Most importantly, they kept the secret of who the Kalu really were. The apostates also helped maintain the illusion of a huge force of Kalu under the Emperor's control. In reality, the Emperor's forces were small, the bulk of which were kept close to the tower at all times. It was the largest number of informants and apostates that comprised the street forces. Ren's screaming had stopped. She passed out from the pain. The healers were trying to revive her. Panic had started to fill the room. Every one of them knew what would happen if this girl or the thing inside her died. All would pay in blood, and it would be slow. As they worked on the girl to save her, one of them started to feel something odd. In turn, each of them would feel it too, until no one in the room was quite themselves. Ren's last decision was guided by an unseen force. She reached for the knife beside her bed, and before anyone could move, she had cut the baby out of her belly. It was alive, and a moment later, a frail man was carrying it out a tunnel at the base of the tower. Outside, in the hall, the loyal Kalu guards stood unaware of the mayhem behind the door, or the quiet calm that had fallen over the room. This room, high atop the factory of sorrow. Claude, Book 6, The Gift. Jacob held on tight to the stone now. It was nearly pulling him to the top of the cliff. From that point he could see all of the light of Sokar grow dim. In the sky, what looked like 3 flat steel squares hovered over the city, blocking out the light from the stars above. They looked to Jacob as if they would flatten the city should they fall. The stone glowed in his hand. The power of it no longer scared him, but what he saw did scare him. It did not seem that long ago when he first found the stone. In that time that followed, he had done amazing things, frightening things, and at last, unspeakable things. He was just a boy when the stone called to him, singing its song of power and fear. As his world fell before him, he saw these things in his mind's eye. An axe ripping through the air above his father's head, the red floor that came afterwards. He could not recall feeling bad at the time, but there again, at the time, he could not have understood where it would lead. He had been protected by the stone from that day. All he had to do was act as it commanded, and he would be safe. As the fear grew in the town, and then the city and beyond, Jacob only then was aware that he was not alone. Elsewhere in the land, 2 other boys had been chosen by 2 other stones, acting separately from each other, but at the same purpose. The 3 boys had brought the world to the brink of disaster. The stone had moved them from town to town, taking lives in the night, teaching them to be efficient killing machines. That was all they needed to do. Once it got going, the people would do the rest. They would lock their doors, suspect each other, and in the end, succumb to the worst of all emotions, envy. Envy and jealousy would breed from the randomness of the violence, the pure blind chance that some would lose so much and others would lose nothing, was more than most could bear. Into their perfect world sorrow had fallen from the sky, and by the hands of these babes their end would soon follow. Jacob stood motionless as the huge square fell on the city, crashing down upon the city, extinguishing its light, leveling its buildings and people alike. From below the crash, Jacob could hear the faint cry of his world dying, and still he felt nothing. He was numb. He was immune to the horror of his acts. In all that the stone gave Jacob, the power and the madness, it never fostered any sense of empathy or compassion. Jacob had sensed that someone was watching him. He turned to meet the eyes of his brothers, not brothers of the flesh, but brothers by their actions. The 2 other boys stood there staring out past Jacob at the spectacle of doom, with the same blank expression as Jacob. Below them, the valley that used to be Sokar was sealed under those squares, like a tomb. Now, as the boys watched, the metal started to stir. It began as thin filaments stretching upward, twisting and weaving into each other until shape took form. Soon walls formed, and then buildings. In the center of this dance of living metal, 3 spires started to take shape, reaching higher and higher into the sky, growing taller and wider than all other structures. The 3 towers spiraled towards the heavens, glowing in a gold and black hue that gave off a pure radiance of evil. A living structure, building itself before their eyes, fed by blood and pain of their fathers, and still the boys felt nothing. A moment later, the stone gave Jacob and his brothers in arms a final lesson, understanding of guilt. Like a wave of pain inside their hearts, all of the things they had done came flashing back. Each cut of the flesh, each crack of the bone, each last twitch and gasp as life ran out of an innocent body was relived, and they felt every pain with them. The weight of their actions so great that they might collapse beneath it. So great their remorse that they begged for it to stop, pained for it with their very lives to end. Each boy standing on the edge of the cliff, holding a glowing stone in one hand, encased in the horror of what their deeds had been, their deeds most demonic. Just when they could take no more, the stone pulled at their hands, forcing them closer to each other. With each inch they came closer to each other, their pain lessened, until the stones were touching, and they felt nothing again. Pure and clear, they were at peace. The 3 of them stood now, looking out over the new dark city that would come to be known as Razor City. Their bodies were glowing like the city on the top of that hill, changing, becoming stronger, their minds blank, their hearts devoid of any feeling. In time they would find their way onto the dark streets, into the tallest tower, and in the employ of the Emperor himself, and in time they would be known as the Triad, 3 hulking frames acting as one out of necessity, self-preservation, and fear of the pain of consequences. Forever pawns in the trade of suffering, easily used by the forces of evil. An endless sentence in purgatory disguised as a gift of mercy from the merchants of sorrow. Claude, Book 7, An Awakening. The night was unlike the others. It was brighter, and he could make out the form in the sky. It had been called the moon by the ancients. Claude stared at the moon for a long time on the roof of the hollowed-out building, while the pack hunted below. In the distance, he could see 3 towers glowing in the dark skyline of Razor City. He wondered what manner of evil waited for him there. He had known for some time what he was, and he could feel the pull to join them. He could feel the pull of the Kaloo. He could feel it more when he was up here. It was heavy with fear, and he could feel it feeding him. He used his teachings to try and subdue these feelings, but it was not easy. In his mind, he saw himself as a Sicarian, mindful of the pain that power, for power's sake, could bring. If Claude needed any more reminder of the outcome of that ideology, he need not look any further than from this rooftop. The anguish, the horror that laid out before his eyes was reason enough to fight these urges with all that he had. In the street below, far from Claude's rooftop, a woman was crying out for help. She, like so many others in this city, was a victim tonight of the Kaloo. 3 men were pulling at her, ripping her clothes off. Her soft, naked body crawling in the gutter, begging for life, praying to the goddess for a glimmer of divinity in these last moments. Claude could smell her fear. Claude could sense her despair. It coursed through his body, filling him with strength and power. He wanted to let it go, just let it fill him up. Let his mind go to the street, to imagine what it would be like to tear into her, to bathe in her blood and bask in the gore and carnage with these men. It was both exhilarating and horrifying. After a long moment, something started to stir inside him. Something new. He could not put a name to it yet, but it was different than he had ever felt before. He felt power, but not from fear. It was coming from somewhere else, from something else. Something deep inside him. He felt this rage coming over him. He wanted to control it, but before he could, he was swimming in it. His muscles bulging, his heart racing, his eyes grew sharper, and his body lunged forward to the edge of the roof. He was unable to control the movements. He was on all fours, racing down the side of the building wall, his claws digging deep into the old block and mortar joints. A moment later, he was on the street, and the city was flying past his eyes like a blur of light and form. He was on top of the 3 men, ripping at them before he could comprehend what was happening, his claws cutting deep into them, flesh and bone flying from their bodies, blood spraying in all directions. He could barely hear the cries of the woman over the howling coming from his own mouth. He began to slow his movements enough to realize that nothing was left of the men. All around him lay only pieces of them, hanging from cold gray walls, spinning in pools of blood on the hard street. He fell to one side and lay on the ground. He looked to the woman, her frail, naked body frozen in horror, unable to move or speak, tears and blood running down her face, her chest heaving in the shock of Claude's attack. A moment later, Pale and the pack came racing to his side. Pale was frantic, begging him to return with them below where it was safe. Claude got to his feet and began to follow them. Just then, the woman found words. From deep within her, a cry of relief. She cried out to him as he raced away. "Thank you for my life," she howled, sobbing and screaming it over and over into the empty night. "Thank you. Thank you." Claude, Book 8, Another Place. Kara was almost floating. In fact, she was floating. All around her were the people she loved. Most of all, her boy Caleb was there. He was just a boy, playing in the tall grass behind her home, on the cliff overlooking the city of Sokar, a shining city of light and love, devoid of as much as a dimly lit corner. Yet Kara could feel something dark. Kara could not see this darkness, but she knew it was there all the same, like a change in the barometric pressure before you could even see a rain cloud. She tried to push this feeling away because she loved this moment so much. She floated on across the fields with her warm light from the 2 stars on her face. In the distance, Kara could see a small ranch and a young man and a girl running hand in hand. It was Caleb and Kai, the girl from the next farm over. They stopped at the end of the field and kissed each other. Kara's heart filled with joy. She knew Caleb would marry this girl. She knew Caleb was in love. As she watched them in love's innocent embrace, Kara could feel something cold behind her. It was not a wind. It was more like the touch of an unseen hand. It was cold, and it was drawing near. She wanted to turn and look at it, but it was too late. She was drifting away from the field. A fog was rolling in from the river, clouding Kara's sight. In a clearing, Kara saw a baby lying on the grass on a blanket. Caleb, older now, lay next to the baby as Kai watched them from a rocking chair, her belly full with another child. Kai's face was glowing as a mother and a mother-to-be, looking at Kara's son with all the love in the world. Kara started to cry, weeping with joy at the pure happiness that her boy had found, knowing that all of her worries about Caleb had been unfounded. Caleb had grown into a fine man and father. He was not alone in the world. He was not restless at all. He was a man at peace with his life, but behind Kara, and closer now, was a wall of coldness pressing against her, threatening to wrap around her. Kara floated on, past Caleb's next child and the next, past those children's first loves, and then past their children. Kara was moving fast now. Behind her, a wind was blowing, fast and cold. In the distance, Kara could barely see the light from the 2 stars was fading, and the feeling of love and warmth was all but gone. Above her, the dark clouds had rolled in. Light was flashing from the sky, and Kara could see 3 streaks of fire falling from the heavens. She was spinning now as she flew faster and faster. In front of her, she could see a crowd of people gathering around something. She slowed down now, floating into the crowd. At once she recognized the landscape. It was the field behind her home. The old women from the village were there. Kai was there. She was young, and she was crying, shielding her eyes from something. Kara floated over them as the dark clouds blocked out the last light. The wind pushed Kara round and round. She strained her eyes to see what was below her. The lightning flashed overhead, lighting the fields below. Kara saw her son laying dead on the grass, killed by her own hand. Next to him lay her own body, Caleb's plowshare deep in her. Kara wanted to close her eyes, to wish this vile vision away, but she could not even blink. Fire and blood rained down on her now. The world gone mad everywhere she could see. Standing on the cliff now, Kara watched her world fall. Kara saw the 3 boys that were harbingers of this end. She wept from her eyes that could not close. Then from all around her warmth came, surrounding her, shielding her from the horror unfolding everywhere. Kara felt a small hand in hers. It was Caleb. "Do you see?" Caleb spoke. "Do you understand?" Kara was not sure why, but she did understand. Her sweet boy was with her now, and he was safe. "Yes," she said softly. "I understand, and I forgive you." Caleb smiled. He was a man now standing beside her. He pointed to the 3 lines of fire in the sky. That was the stones. They are the seeds of sorrow. These 3 boys are only instruments. They are lost, he said. I understand. The city sprung up from the ashes. The towers rose into the sky, and the pain grew and radiated from the dark city before them. Caleb pointed again this time to the tallest tower. Do you see? Caleb asked again. Yes, Kara replied. What is it? It is all our hope, he said. Kara felt it, this small thing. She could see it in her mind's eye. What can I do? She asked her son. What you have done before. Protect the world, Caleb said. Kara's eyes filled with tears again. She had killed her son to protect this world. Now she must protect a creature to save her world. Kara looked at her son again, but he was no longer there. Only pure light remained, and at once she realized it had never been Caleb at all. Caleb was dead, and so was she. She had created everything she saw. It was the hope of a mother still clinging to the life she had lost. Kara was gone now from that. She was the light she saw, and that light was powerful. If she concentrated, she could feel and see more, and maybe, just maybe, she could make others feel that light too. Protect the world, repeated in her head, and Kara thought that she would do just that. Claude, Book 9, Dark Deliverance. In a place with no hope, on dark, blood-covered streets filled with lost people from a lost world, a story is growing. It is spoken in hushed tones in small groups of trusted friends and family. It is a story that brings with it something that these people have not had in 300 years. It brings with it hope. The story starts with a girl, a virgin, walking home late, and is attacked by 3 men meaning to take from her her innocence. Then, as the girl feels she has nothing left, she prays to the goddess to protect her, and from deep in the dark night comes a thing, raging and snarling, a thing that mutilates these men in seconds, and then is gone as fast as it came, leaving the girl unharmed. As the story grows, the thing is fashioned into a dark deliverer sent by the goddess to help the frail, the helpless, the weak. This thing runs with wolves and lives in the bowels of the city. The tale is twisted and twisted with each telling, and before long this thing is the goddess's hand of vengeance. It is to the goddess what the triad is to the emperor. On the tail of this story have come more stories such as this, those of the lost that have come to embrace evil and do evil. There is now something for them to fear. For something is moving in the night. Something can sense evil, hear the cries of the helpless, and is delivering them from harm. For the apostates and their informants, this thing is now their main task. Find it or die. In the tower, the emperor has focused all of his powers on this task. All of his minions are working the dark streets without sleep to hush these small glimpses of hope. They are told to kill without warning, to harm without cause, and to foster terror in every way possible to counter this story. The emperor's words are simple. For every time the story is told, take 5 lives. Yet the story has no end. The people of the streets will not stop. Before long, another soul comes forward to tell of an unspeakable beast that saved him and his child from the forces of the emperor. And then another, and another, until the world is raging, taking on a life of its own. It becomes a new fable, the tale of a defender sent from the belly of the city in direct defiance of the powerful forces that rule, killing the evil, defending the weak, bent on the destruction of the emperor himself. Deep beneath the city, Claude is aware of the impact his trips to the surface are having on the people, and he is happy. Each day he stretches out his feelings to the surface, searching for these creatures. He tries to pinpoint them in his mind's eye, but as always, he is watchful of the eye in the tower. He can feel the power that lay there, and although he feels strong, he is not sure that he can stand against the force he feels there. He is gifted with the knowledge of the Kalu, and he understands the Emperor. He understands him more than he would like to, and from time to time he can feel the rage and ecstasy the Emperor feels. He can feel the lament and sorrow coming from the work in the basement of the tower, and beyond that he can feel a force and hear a voice. It is a gentle and sweet voice that comes to him when he is still. This voice has always been there from the moment of his birth. It is the voice that guides Pale and the pack to care for him. It is the voice that leads him to the wall, to the street that first night, and every night since. The people of the street call it the goddess, but he knows it by another name, a woman's name, and she is the closest thing to a mother Claude has ever known. As night approaches, her voice calls to him, and Claude does her bidding, and each night she bids him closer and closer to the tower. Each night the pull is stronger and stronger, and soon, very soon, Claude knows he will climb the tower and face the thing inside. Face the thing that hates him, the very thing that made him, and Claude knows that one of them must die. Yet no matter how far he stretches out his mind into the night, he cannot see which one of them it will be, which one of them will fall. Not even the goddess can see that far. What he can see is the Emperor calling his forces together, plotting to destroy Claude, and he must choose to let one life go to save millions. Claude wishes, for the only time in his life, that he did not have such sight. Claude, Book 10, The Universe of the Kalu. It is a dim and distant star in a forbidden system. It is called Realm, and it was fading from the moment it was born. Inside this system is a world that all the known universe fears, the first world of the Kalu. They are the most ancient race. Their origins can be traced back to the Great Expulsion, when the Omniverse pushed forth this and other universes in the time of mass expansion and the subsequent chaos that followed. At first, the Kalu were like most life. They were energy, without mass or form. They existed because they chose to and created what they wanted. In time, they began to create life, to populate world after world, until the universe was replete with their work. They were filling the void, seeding countless worlds with every manner of life they could envision. They were the creator. They were known as the bringers of life. In their effort to understand the intentions of the Omniverse, the Kalu developed the concept of a master creator. The Kalu contemplated the nature of the Omniverse and the universe that they controlled, seeking to understand the mind of this master creator. They contemplated the act of creation and all that followed, always looking for a pattern. In time, a pattern began to reveal itself. The pattern was sorrow. Everywhere they looked, for every single action of creation, there were uncounted acts of destruction and devastation. Once the universe was born, it immediately began to die. Worlds took shape, and then they were destroyed by novas or collisions with other planets or other bodies. Systems would find balance only to begin to decay. Stars that brought life-giving warmth would begin to burn out from the time they produced their first light. Dark holes in space devoured worlds and stars with such random disregard for life that it could only mean one thing. Everything died, everything rotted, and everything created would be decimated. The void they had filled with life would return to an empty void once more. They thought that they had discovered the nature of the Master Creator and its intent and need. its needs for destruction, its intent for everything to die, and it craved sorrow. Even in the worlds they had filled with life, sorrow and death were the dominant forces. Fear was the driving condition. Even in the work they had done, the Master Creator's hand was at work as well. The evidence was overwhelming. The Creator's intent was clear, and in their efforts to be more like the Creator, they would become the merchants of sorrow. They would rule the universe as the Master Creator ruled them. Most of the Kalu accepted this as truth, and from that they resigned to submit their existence to this rule. They too would die. The Kalu took physical form and designed their life experience to do what they saw in the Master Creator. They would be fed on sorrow and death. They would bring their message of the Creator to all worlds they filled. In this, they found purpose and in alignment with the Master Creator. A few Kalu did not believe that this was the intent of the Creator. They refused to take physical form and continued seeding the distant worlds in the universe, believing that creation alone was the sole intent of the Creator. They believed that life and the universe would find balance in time. They would live forever in their non-physical state, watching the worlds they had seeded, waiting for the intent to be revealed and perhaps aid those in need. Over time, the Kalu that had taken form would move from world to world, arriving as conquerors, ruling the worlds and fostering despair to feed themselves and honor their view of their Creator. As they moved from world to world, they found that it was harder and harder to feed. The lives had found some balance, and even though these life forms understood they would die, they sought to live without fear. In fact, most created their own Master Creator legends. Some even proposed the concept of another life after the one given by the Kalu. While these changes were in direct opposition with the Kalu's core beliefs of a Creator's intent, it no longer mattered. It was now a matter of survival. In response to this, the Kalu's practice became more and more brutal, more vicious, and more horrifying. In order to live, they could no longer just feed on what little sorrow existed, but they would have to foster more and more. All but gone was the need to align with the Creator. Lost was the original reason for the form they took, for the choice they made. They were trapped in a cage of their own design. Now far from the dim star known as Realm, the Kalu took another world for themselves. The world of Helven, in the blazing light of a triple star. Each star represented a stage of the Kalu's development. One for the formless life that they began as, one for the enlightenment of the Creator's intent, and the last for their choice of mortality. From there, the Kalu would rage throughout the universe, mindlessly feeding for survival alone, bringing sorrow to those they once created and nurtured, and in the fullness of time, every one of them would forget why they started this journey in the first place. The Kalu that did not change saw this as a descent into madness, and tried to stop their misguided brethren from the path. When they could not reason with them, they went out to the farthest corners of the universe and began creating life that could not be overcome by these merchants of sorrow. They attempted to create a life form that would never break, that would never lose hope. They worked on many worlds for thousands of years, and at last on a small blue planet, nurtured by a yellow star, the bringers of life succeeded. In their creation, they saw the last intent of the omniverse, to produce a creature that would defy its surroundings, overcome any obstacle, and in the end, pay tribute to the Master Creator by living a life of joy, if only for a few fleeting moments, in the universe they were given, on the world they inherited, and feel no fear in the face of the unknown. They say that only then did the bringers of life stop creating. Now they watch and wait, and perhaps give hope to those in need. Claude, Book 11, Rage. Claude paces back and forth inside the hall. He can hear the cries as clearly as if they were right next to him. His body is tight and pulsing with rage. The anguish he feels is from the choice he has to make, the choice the pack made for him. They went to the surface in the daylight, and they went because they were told to. Now light is fading, and high above this hall the Triad are doing work most unkind. In the streets by the river, where there is a hollowed-out building with a roof, the same roof that Claude first launched off that night so long ago and saved the girl. On top of that building, pain and suffering is happening. One by one, the pack is being ripped to bits. Only Pale is saved. She is hung out over the street on a thin metal wire which is cutting into her hind legs as she swings. She tries to be quiet. She knows that Claude can hear her. She does not want him to come for her. The pain is tremendous. The clamps that the Triad have placed on her face and body are closing, driving sharp spikes into her fur. She cannot hold back the howl. Deep below, Claude is going mad. He can feel her pain. He wants to save her, to end her pain, to unleash such horror on those that would harm her. He lets her pain and fear wash over him. It fills him with power, and then he is on the run. He is racing through the tunnels and layers of the lower city. Like a flash of muscle churning and bulging, his body flies to the surface of Razor City. Claude grips into the side of the building and covers 10 stories in a second. A moment later, he pulls Pale's weak frame from the wire and places her on the rooftop. She is so weak he cannot even hear her thoughts. Her dark eyes half open, looking at him. Run is all she can think. Even now, at her end, she is trying to protect him. But Claude is not going anywhere. He knows what waits behind him, standing on the red-stained roof, lurking in the shadows. Claude knows it is a trap, but it is a trap for them, not for him. He has a second more to say goodbye to Pale, and then the roof starts to shake. The Triad moves quickly across the rooftop, their huge fists crashing down in the spot where Claude stood a second ago. As they swing their heads around, looking for him, he lands a quick blow to the back of the center one's head, sending them reeling onto the rooftop. Claude is on top of them now, ripping and cutting into the three. They hammer him with fist after fist, breaking bones beneath his muscle-ridden frame. He does not stop. He knows if he does, he is dead. One blow pushes Claude over onto the roof, and the Triad cover him fast. 6 hands clawing and punching and tearing at him with a force unlike any he has ever known. Claude can feel him losing his rage. Fear is coming over him. Fear that he will die on this roof. The Triad have his arms pinned and are landing death blow after death blow. Claude can feel the Emperor laughing. He can sense the world he was made to protect falling away from him. And then he hears a voice. She calls to him, telling him to fall. Just fall. And with his last bits of will, he pushes up at the Triad, rolling over onto them and then pulling them over him again, closer to the edge of the roof. One of the Triads are hanging off the roof now. The others are trying to pull him back. Claude rears up and tears into them, ripping and biting through their skin, exposing organs and a wave of blood. Claude rips deeper into them, pulling organs and bones out of the dark bodies. He is almost inside them now, clawing and pulling at them from the inside. A deep growl slips from one of the Triad's mouth, and on it the first fear that any of the three have known in 300 years. It fills Claude and renews him. He rips into the neck of one of them and pulls the head off. Fountains of blood spew in every direction, covering the Triad and Claude. The Triad brings an unexpected hammer to hit the side of Claude's head, and for just a moment, Claude is stunned. And then the voice speaks to him again. Just fall. And then he knows what to do. Claude pulls the last two over the edge. using the weight of his body to fling them off into the thin air. Twisting and turning in midair, Claude flips onto the top of the Triad, and a second later they hit the ground, crashing hard into the pavement. The Triad's bodies are crushed under Claude's weight. Bone and skull shatter and fly like shrapnel. Claude's legs and arms break as he bounces off the Triad and lands on the street. The Triad lay dying on the street. Claude lay, unable to move. Claude lay there, watching the Triad, when suddenly they start to twitch, and then move. He is in a state of disbelief as they start to crawl towards him. Just then, a lead pipe crashes into the Triad's head, and then another, and another. Above Claude, a mob of people have gathered. They are finishing the Triad. Soon they will be dead. Others move to help Claude, soothing his pain with just their touch, a human touch that he has never known before, and in a few moments, he is healed. The mob is still ripping at the Triad as Claude moves away from them. He feels them pouring out 300 years of fear onto the street. One last girl is still walking behind Claude. He stops and turns to her. It is the girl he saved so many nights ago. "You saved me," she says in a broken voice. "Now we save you." Claude nods at her. She begins to cry. "You finish this. By the goddess, you finish this," she says as he walks away. "I will," he says in a voice he has never used, filled with a feeling he has never known. "By the goddess, I will." Claude, Book 12. The Commodity of Sorrow. The Kalud designed their existence, their own physics. They created the rule of their interactions with the universe. They made sorrow a commodity. They made feelings a form and substance. They used these feelings as fuel, as material, and as a means to control and conquer. Everything in the universe must follow these rules. They are the rules of the Kalud. From their living city and the towers the Emperor resides in to control their worlds, all these things are built from the commodity of sorrow. Sorrow, in this matrix, is a component, the catalyst for all power, and on a small blue world in the outer rim of the universe, this commodity is fading, and with it, the Kalud's power. As it fades there, it fades everywhere, for all of their power is based on the abundance of sorrow. The connection of sorrow between worlds creates an unseen web from which the Kalud draw their power. High atop the triple towers, the Emperor stands at attention. In the tall glass before him, the image of one of the three overlords is punishing the Emperor with his mind, drawing from him his power and weakening him. It is the only thing close to pain the Kalud can feel, and the Emperor is feeling it. From far across the universe, the Kalud overlords can feel the loss of sorrow, and they know the Emperor is to blame. When the overlord is done, the image is gone, and the Emperor falls to the floor. It will take some time for him to recover. It will take much sorrow to fill him up. His minions are quick to his side. "My lord," one man asks, "what can we do for you?" "Fucking fool, unhand me!" He rages with what he has left in his weak body. The minions move away quickly. The Emperor falls into a chair and pulls himself up to the desk. "Find this fucking creature that plagues my city. Find this thing that gives these specks of life hope. This is what you can do for me. Bring me this thing alive and stretch it out a mile long, weeping blood and shit from its fucking heart, withering in sweet pain and pouring life into my tongue." He finishes and leans on the desk, his body weight all but too much for him to bear. The man is filled with fear. He knows of the death of the Triad, but does not want to tell the Emperor. "My lord," the man begins again, as the Emperor brings his steel gaze onto the minion. "Your Triad has not returned from the trap." He stops, waiting for the Emperor to become unhinged. The man does not realize the effect the Overlord's communication has had on the Emperor. The Emperor says nothing. He just stares at the minion. He finishes with a trembling voice. "The creature has killed the Triad." He stops and then adds, "with the help of the street people." For a moment, the Emperor does not move or blink a red eye. He just stares blankly past the man. It is so quiet in the room that the only sounds the man can hear is his breathing, coursing in and out rapidly. A second later, the man feels 3 razor-sharp claws pierce his back. The claws pop through the man's chest, glistening with dark red blood, and curl back into his stomach. He is still staring at the Emperor as his body is lifted off the floor and pulled away towards the door. It is the Kalu guard summoned by the Emperor without a word. He will kill the man slowly. At the doorway, the guard turns the man's body sideways so he will not fit through the doorway, and pulls his claws back, ripping the man's rib cage and organs out from his back, sending a rainbow of blood and carnage onto the white steel walls. Then the other 2 guards dig into the man's flesh, moving so fast that he is still alive when they eviscerate the minion. The Emperor looks on, feeding on the pain. The Emperor orders the guards out into the streets to hunt and kill, for until the Emperor is strong again, all will be made to suffer. Just out of view of the Emperor's weak eye, and in between life and death, Kara sees her plan coming together. She knows there will never be a chance like this again. Kara sends her voice out to a lonely creature waiting in the bowels of the earth. He is hungry for revenge, stronger than he has ever been, and just maybe, with her help, he can end this tonight, removing forever the commodity of sorrow from this and all worlds. Claude, Book 13, Prelude. Claude was only mildly aware he was dreaming. In his dream, Kara was talking to him. She was a pure white light, but he could imagine her face. He was not sure if it was her face or the face of the young girl he saved, or a composite of all the women he had seen in the streets. In the end, they were all the same to him. They were light that he must defend. Kara was telling him that his work was almost done, that he could soon rest, and that something was waiting for him. She was telling him that his fate and his life waited elsewhere for him at the end of this journey. Beyond Kara, Claude could see or feel something else, a force or presence. It had been there all along. Kara called it the Bringers of Life, and it felt very familiar to Claude. Claude knew that he was made from a union of the Emperor and a human named Ren, but he did not feel like a human or like the Kalu. As he let the feeling of the Bringers of Life come over him, he realized that they were his parents. They had been the ones to bring him to life, and they had used Kara to guide him. At once he understood that the Kalu were the fallen Bringers of Life, and that they had fought the balance that was so natural to all life, to all worlds. He was shown the tower. He saw for the first time what the Emperor was, the darkness that he rode as he fed off of the misery of worlds. He was standing at the base of the tower. They were gleaming in blood. It was cascading down the sides of the tower like a waterfall of humanity, flooding the streets and washing away the balance. On the top spire of the center tower, the Emperor screeched wildly into the night, howling and raging as the sorrow powered him and made him immortal. He knew and understood that the Kalu were misguided, that they had lost their way. He wanted to feel sorry for them, but he only felt rage. It filled him up. He could sense all the anguish this and other worlds had suffered. He could feel all the pain the Kalu had brought on the solar winds as their seeds of sorrow flew, and he understood that he was made to use this, to end this. He stared up at the towers as if a light was turned on. He was awake, and he was standing at the base of the tower, no longer in a dream. He had returned to the place he was saved from, the place he was made, the place that his mother was murdered, the place that millions of humans had met their end. He could tell that the Emperor was weak, and the Emperor knew he was there, and before he realized it, he was moving up the walls of this living tower, racing to meet his fate, racing towards the voice of the goddess, racing to keep a promise to a young girl, a promise to end this. Claude, Book 14, A Dark Redemption. The apostates were never as scared as they were tonight. They felt the weight of their choices in a way they could have never foreseen. Something was very different on this night. Something was changing, and they had to make a choice. On the streets below, the people had risen up and were fighting the Kalu and the apostates that helped them. Hope was driving them, and a savior of the people was climbing this tower at this very moment to challenge the Emperor. Death was on the wind, and they that remained in the tower to protect the Emperor were huddled into two hallways at the top of the world. They were the first line of defense against the creature that was howling towards the tower's roof. Behind them, in the next room, stood 24 Kalu guards, and in a room behind them, the Emperor, all waiting to bathe in gore and feed on the sorrow of battle. Each of the apostates had a voice in their heads, screaming at them, pushing them, forcing them to see the world that they had helped enslave, the world of pain they had ignored to gain small favor from the beasts that ruled them. They were torn in their hearts. They were bleeding for the world they had forsaken. And they were given a choice, a chance of redemption, if only they could find the human part of their souls this night. One by one, they made their choice, the only choice they could, the only choice they had left, a choice to save humanity. Inside the top rooms, as the Emperor paced back and forth, still weak but ready for battle, he heard a voice of a fool, a weak voice of a weak race begging him to lie down. He laughed at this voice. Whatever redemption was, he was not interested in it. He craved the death and mayhem that was coming. He still was surprised that he could not see this thing, that he did not understand what it was. It was as if something was blocking his sight, stopping him from fully seeing what he was to face, but it did not matter. He could feel its approach. He would see it soon enough. He would claw this thing to death and drink it dry. He was sure this would end tonight, and that he would not have to worry about this thing anymore. He knew this much with complete certainty, and on that he and the voice agreed. 10 minutes to midnight. The Kalu guards were confused as the humans started to file into the room. "Get back to your post," one of the guards growled at them, but they did not stop. When the first apostate pulled his blade out, the Kalu guard laughed at him. When the first apostate pulled that blade across his own throat, sending his blood spraying into the room, the Kalu guards were shocked. The apostate fell on the floor, and another stood, cutting his throat. Then another, and another, until the room was filled in blood. The Kalu guard could not understand what was happening. The humans gave off no fear or pain. They had never seen a death that they could not feed on. These deaths gave them nothing, and before they could know more, Claude was in the room. He cut through them with such force that some of the Kalu stood right up for the time before their bodies fell apart. Guards' limbs and heads flying in every direction, fear sweeping from the Kalu's body, feeding Claude, paralyzing the guards. Soon Claude stood alone, covered in gore in the center of the room, apostate and Kalu bodies covering the floor. Claude breathed in the fear, and it ripped through every inch of him, giving him a surge of power unlike any he had ever known. One door left, he thought as he made his way to the last room. 5 minutes to midnight. From under the door, blood started to flow. The screams came after, and unlike anything the Emperor had known, these screams did not feed him. These screams made him weak, for these screams were from the Kalu, and with each death, the web of power weakened, With each loss of Cthulhu, fear lessened and hope grew. The flood of blood raced across the floor in front of the Emperor as he backed away from it and the thing that was coming. He was in the far corner of the room, pressed hard against the window, when the door shattered inward, and the creature he had wanted so badly just a few short hours ago came into view. The Emperor knew in an instant that it was Tal, his offspring, the thing he had worked so hard to make, the perfect combination of Cthulhu and human, the thing he thought was dead, drowned in the shallow death by the Triad. Claude stood motionless, staring at the Emperor, his father, his prey. "I made you," the Emperor spoke. "I don't care," Claude replied, and started forward with sure and deliberate steps, holding his rage in check, letting it pile up and churn, waiting to let it explode. The Emperor pressed his body harder against the glass wall. Fear shot through him. He felt sick. "You were meant to rule all worlds," he yelled at Claude in defiance, grasping at anything to try and reason with him, sure now that Claude was stronger than him, that Claude could and would win. "No one is meant to rule these worlds," Claude whispered and stopped 10 feet from the Emperor. Claude felt no fear, no hesitation, no remorse. He would kill the Emperor and end this tonight. Under Claude's feet, the blood flowed past him to the corner, filling the floor under the Emperor. Blood still dripping from Claw's hands and claws. His face glistened with it. His body was covered in it. He was death, and he was getting closer. The Emperor froze in fear. The only thing he could think to say was, "I built this city for you." "And it will be your tomb," Claude howled and lunged at the Emperor. They locked in battle, claws ripping and stabbing at each other, rolling in the gore and carnage, fists pounding into each other's face, claws ripping flesh and muscle from limb and body. Claude was on top of the Emperor, raging into him, unloading every bit of power with each blow, pouring out all of his hate, all his pain, all his revenge on the Emperor's weakened frame. The Emperor scrambled to get out from under Claude's attack, slipping on the blood-soaked floor. Lunging towards the walls, grasping for a handhold, he managed to break free. Claude sprung to his feet and moved slowly towards him, sizing him up for the kill. The Emperor knew this was his end. He summoned up all of the power left in his body for one last stand. Outside, the wind and rain pounded against the glass, reminding the Emperor of that night not so long ago when he swung from the top spire in pure joy. And then, he thought, a small chance. The Emperor swung his fist at the glass, crashing it outward in a single blow, flinging himself out into the night, digging into the side of the building, racing upward to the spire in fear this time, with a thin chance for survival. Claude followed him. The night air was cold and thin. The rain and lightning blazed around him as he climbed higher and higher to the spire. Below these creatures, the base of these living towers were starting to crack. The structures that were built on the commodity of sorrow were starting to fall, and as the towers started to crumble on this world, the Cthulhu's power on every world started to fail. In the streets, far below, the people had gathered to witness the fall of their master, and with each minute and crack, their hope grew. Midnight, at the top of the world. The Emperor hung on to the thinnest point of the spire, wrapping his arched body around it. The spire swung back and forth with his weight, arching downward and lashing up over into the other side. Claude came to a stop at the base of the spire, looking up into the rain and light at this thing that had brought so much fear, seeing it now clinging to life with this desperate move. Claude could feel the tower shaking. He knew that they would not last long. In his head, the voice spoke to him, driving him to finish what he had started. He placed one hand on the base of the spire and in a single move flew up and onto the Emperor's body, driving his claws deep into the Emperor's chest, riding the spire as it dipped lower than the base. The sound the Emperor made echoed into the night, filling the skies over Razor City, signaling that it was almost finished. The two creatures clung to the spire as it flung upward, throwing them both up and off the spire into the sky above, twisting and flying. Claude and the Emperor were hurled upwards. The Emperor grappled with Claude in the thin air, wrestling with him to the last, bent on taking Claude with him to the hard street that lay 300 stories below. Claude pushed to break free as their bodies slowed and started to fall back towards Earth. The Emperor let out a laugh from his dark, vile mouth, gurgling and pouring blood. He pulled Claude's face close to his. "You could have ruled forever," he spit out as Claude struggled to break free from his death grip. Below, the Emperor saw the spire whipping in the air. He saw one last chance. He pushed at Claude to separate from him and twisted his body to grab the spire as it raced up towards him. Claude, now free and falling from the Emperor, saw the Emperor's last chance, and the voice of the goddess came back to him. "Just fall." The Emperor's hand was stretched out to catch the spire. He dug into it with all he was, and for a second he was saved. And then he felt the steel grip of Claude's hand on his leg. The weight of Claude came in a split second later, and the Emperor's grip slipped away as the spire flung free into the night. Falling now, the two were still. Then it happened. A wave of pain came over him, and another and another. As the Emperor fell, he was made to feel every death that had come by his hand or order. Each death was as strong as the last, each as intense as the last. Before he hit the ground, the Emperor had died millions of times. With Claude's grip on the Emperor like a vice, the tower fell with them, crashing down, and extinguishing the last of the merchants of sorrow and their rule of all worlds. Somewhere between life and what lay beyond. Like fine filaments of light, the buildings that were built on sorrow floated upwards to the clouds, and by dawn, all that remained of the Kalu's reign was in the memories of the people of the worlds. Claude watched as the once dark Razor City vanished from the hilltop overlook. He watched with Kara and her son Caleb. He watched as the worlds he gave his life to protect shined again as a beacon of wisdom and life and hope for all. The vision of Sokar was fading now, and Claude heard the goddess speak for the last time. "Your fate, your life awaits you," she said, as the world vanished into pure light. Claude felt he was floating, and then surrounded by warmth, and then there was light again. The last thing Claude recalled, he was alive again. In the bright light, he could just make out his small, perfect fingers and small, perfect hands, and the warm, protecting touch of a mother's arms. And only bliss followed after. Claude, Book 15, Trinity of Harbingers. They have no feelings. They are unaware of their intent. They simply are. In the vastness of space they travel, bringing with them a message. It is a simple message. It is a common message. And it is a message that countless worlds have received. It comes from deep in a dark star. Always three are forged over and over again, until the smooth, cold metal of the stones are ready. This star is without end, burning forever at the center of the universe, powered by the triple suns. It has but one purpose: produce the harbingers of sorrow without end. Always three. The message is that one life is better than another, that one life must be over another, that for one life to win, one life must lose. It is that simple and that powerful. They bring this message to the young. They seek out the minds of the young before they are fully formed, before they truly understand. In world after world, the balance is found from the reliance on each other, first to survive, then to grow and thrive. The balance always comes, and with it hope. Into these worlds, the three stones fall. Always three. They come as three bright lines in the sky, falling with purpose, and singing a song to the young. Come to me, the stone sings. I will show you something no one knows, something special, something that is just for you. And in turn, 3 boys are chosen. Always boys, for boys are easily led astray. Boys, for their young egos are so strong from such a tender age. Such unspeakable madness and horror comes from these simple stones. All that see these lights in the sky know to run and hide, for these stones have come before. In the history of these falling worlds, it is known that the stones come and come again. Always 3. Sometimes the seeds that these stones would sow do not take hold. Sometimes the people of these worlds know what the stones are, what evil they bring. It is sometimes a feeling, and other times it is because they have come before. The young and the frail worlds fall without any resistance. The worlds that resist buy only time, for the harbingers will fall again and again, without feeling, without remorse, and without fail. Always 3. From the dark star, a sea of these harbingers radiate out in every direction in the universe. They are sailing through the cold darkness of space with purpose, but no conscience, intent, with reason, bringing a message that will still sing to the young boys of these worlds. And even in the absence of the Kalu, it will sing its song of sorrow. And what will come of these songs, no one can say. You've been listening to Razor City by Richard Hendry. Copyright 2016.